And you probably know that because we're connected somehow on the internet to each other. I like that. Thanks for connecting. So, as usual, I am randomly on a Facebook Live here or a YouTube Live, depending on where you're finding me, because I can, frankly. And that's the beauty of the internet. So, welcome. I am sitting here with my friend John Losi. John and I have known each other almost exactly a year now, actually. We became buddies at an event called The Thing, which I think I'm the only one who pronounces it as The Thing, but it sounds so impending. But actually, it's a very cool event where people who have their own thing, either their own business, their own entrepreneurial hustle, maybe a belief set that shows up in their art or whatever it is, they've got a thing. And it's a whole bunch of like-minded individuals who help each other grow in their understanding of how to birth that thing into a bigger thing. So a really cool place to be. And John, like myself, small business owner, really big thinker. We connected really fast. And actually funny, John, I'm going to tell a quick story before we really fully introduce you. One of the first things when we connected was John gave me a compliment and a very honest critique. And I was like, oh, I like this guy. Like rarely do you find somebody who has the confidence to go, I like you enough to just tell you what I think. And it was like good, honest critique. It was great. And it made me better in the moment. It made me better in the long term. And I'm like, that's the type of person you keep.
I was
So
thinking about that exact exchange as we were getting ready for this, as the first exchange.
yeah, no, and really, I mean, talk about showing just the honest potential of a relationship when somebody is like, I'm not going to be a jerk here, but I am going to tell you the truth as I saw it, and we're going to talk about it. It wasn't a drop the mic moment. It was, this is kind of what I was seeing. And I'm like, whoa, I'm glad you were seeing that. And it was a little uncomfortable at first because anytime you get a little bit of a honest, harsh moment of like, you didn't quite hit the nail, that never feels quite right. But the way you did it was so like, you cared that the next time I hit the nail on the head. I was like, that was, and I'm like, oh man, I was just like flabbergasted. Like this is the type of person you keep. So internet, welcome. This is John Losi. You will want to keep him too. Short version, he owns Into Wisdom Group, and he is a consultant that, you know what? I'm not even going to butcher this part. You tell us, what do you consult on, John?
Okay, well, and been a lot of thinking about what, because when you say consultant, people go, what the heck? What's going on? And you can't swing a cat
too
without hitting a consultant these days.
Yeah.
What I really am is I guide people and organizations to their next best step towards growth and sustainability. So I'm a guide. And my background in several of the previous lives that I've led in the past 50 plus years, I was a wilderness guide, an outdoor guy. And I'm finding a lot of the same things that I did when I was creating and designing expeditions and outdoor programs. I'm asking the same questions now to individuals and organizations. So when I say that I'm a guide, I truly am taking those guiding skills and applying them to figuring out where somebody or where an organization wants to end up, and then creating a path that's going to get them there. So that's the high level piece of how I explain what I do to people. My wife gets more of the questions than I do. She's trying to explain how, what does your husband do? Well, so I'm trying to give her some tools for that.
So I want to, this is fun. My friend Ted has a show called The Ted Show, interestingly. And he always says that all of his research is worth $2 and he usually pours that into scotch. And so beforehand, when you and I got on here, we were talking about something, and I'm going to like where we were going with this. I'm throwing it out the window because you just gave me the coolest analogy that I need to understand now. So you are a guide and you're using wilderness guidance in a business context. And now I suddenly have no clue what you mean and I have to find out. Help me understand this, what are the corollaries between the two experiences that you keep finding?
Yeah. So if you're going someplace, let's say you're going in your car, get in your car and you want to get someplace, you first enter the destination in your GPS. Mm. So a lot of people don't think about that when they're talking about their organization or their personal ability, professional leadership skills, whatever they do, they just get in the car and start driving and hope they end up someplace. When I was working, whether I was leading a group or helping plan the group, the first thing that we discussed to align was, what's our destination? And if you don't know where you're going, you're never going to end up there. So the first and the biggest question when I work with, whether I'm doing organizational consulting or working with executives, is finding out what we call framing. What does success look like? Most people come to me with a problem. And if you never change the definition from a problem statement to a success statement, you end up recreating the problem. There's an old adage is that I had a chance, this is one of my former lives, I got a chance to do some training on high performance driving. And really, really cool. Never became a high performance driver, and everybody's glad that never happened. But when you go through this training, you do classroom before you give you the keys. Another good move on their part. And one of the things I will always remember in the classroom, they talk about a lot of different things, but they said, when you're on the track, there's going to be obstacles, and it could be just debris, or it might be a crash. But when there's an obstacle, don't look at the obstacle, look at the opening, because you steer towards what you're looking at. And if you never redefine your issue or your situation from a problem statement, you're always your brain, and this is good brain science, your brain will always steer you back towards that problem. That's why you've got to change your perspective and change your thinking to think about what's the opening, what's the opportunity, what does success look like? And if you define success first, it opens up so many options and opportunities that if you're looking at the problem, you're always looking at it through the same lens. Does that help give you a little bit of context?
Oh, yeah. And what I love there is, I mean, you know me, I'm a Think and Grow Rich junkie. So everything that you're describing with, coming up with your major definite purpose and aiming towards your end destination for your life's journey or your career's journey, and creating that as a mantra that you say to yourself every day so that you keep the goal in mind, because it's very hard to dwell on the negative or the problems if you've got that clarity of the end destination always in your purview. So yeah, boy, that speaks to me. That is really cool.
Yeah.
So how are you, I know you work with a lot of businesses, and we were talking about the difference between culture and I think you said strategy, right? Yeah.
Right.
Let's go into that a little bit, because I think this is a fun segue, because, so we're talking about, keeping your eye, for some people, I think, on the prize, or at least on the opening. I love the performance driving thing. And you were helping frame in our previous conversation the difference between culture and strategy. Help me with that first, and then let's jump into what should businesses be really working on right now, since we're kind of in a bit of a crisis.
Yeah. Well, culture is a catchword out there, and it's an important analogy or imagery that we can use to understand an organization. And culture, when you take it from an anthropology perspective, and that's the language it comes from, it's what's left over. It's what the results. It's the observable things of what your organization, what your civilization is. It's looking at the remnants, looking at the evidence. So it's a helpful analogy when you're looking at an organization and trying to figure out who and what you are. It's less helpful if you want to understand the dynamics of how it works. So I'll go out on a limb here and challenge Drucker. Drucker's the one who said culture eats strategy for lunch. And I, by no means, am nearly as smart as Drucker. But what I've seen, and this is actually where a lot of the guy who came up with, I think his name is Stein, who coined the phrase organizational culture, has turned into this perspective as well. But culture is really great as a descriptor of looking at what's there and trying to describe it. It's not less useful to try and initiate change or figure out why things are happening. So what I say is that, culture and strategy need to go hand in hand. You need to have, let's say there's a really, really positive culture, what's deemed a positive culture. If you don't have a strategy that's aligned with that culture, it's going down. You're not going to be successful. Same thing goes with if you have what might be deemed as a bad culture, a negative culture. If you have a strategy that is aligned with it, you're still going to be successful. A great example that I think about is Zappos. Zappos is based on customer service in a call center. And that call center is really, really held up as a great example of a call center because they have very low turnaround, which is just that is a unique situation in a call center. They have extreme customer loyalty and employee loyalty, and it's a really, really unique culture. But having worked with a number of different call centers, it is unique, and it takes a huge organizational commitment to get there. Now, I've worked with other call centers who understand people don't go to a call center for a career. They go to a call center someplace after college to get their feet in the business world and then move on to something else. So you have an average tenure of between 8 and 13, 14 months of somebody that goes to work at a call center. There's a couple of places that have realized that, and instead of seeing high turnover as a negative cultural aspect, they own it. And they say, we're going to pour into people who show up here knowing they're going to leave, but they're going to become our best recruiters. So now this negative cultural aspect of high turnover becomes built into the strategy. There's an alignment there. And now for every person who leaves, they recruit 2 or 3 additional people. So there's where you can take what's a negative culture, align it with a really, really strong strategy, and it turns into a successful business model. So culture and strategy need to be aligned. One that without the other, you're still going to be challenged in your business endeavors. So what do? I love the question you asked before we came on. You said, so with COVID-19, with the lockdown, with the economy, let's just say extremely challenged.
Yeah.
Should we be focusing on culture? Well, not really. You can't change culture quick enough in order to be successful in the short term, let alone the long term. Back before I started talking and thinking about it differently, I knew if you want to change an organization's culture, it'll take 3 to 5 years. And that's if the organization wants to change. I started to think through this, and I have a biology background, another life.
Yeah, you sound like me. I'm that guy who's like, oh yeah, I used to have a job doing that, and people are like, no, you didn't. I'm like, no, here's pictures.
Yeah. So in the biology piece, you learn about ecosystems and systems. Then you get into organizational development. You start to talk about Peter Senge and the group out of MIT that started working with systems thinking. Mm-hmm. And that all works together because what a system is perfectly created to get the outcome that it's getting. And if you don't like the outcome, you don't change the outcome and you don't change the input. You look at the system and look at the relationships. You look at the components of it. You look at how they interact. And that's how you start to change what that output is. And that's why systems thinking is a much more useful tool when you want to change an organization than culture. Culture is a great descriptor and it's a great way to create a brand. But when you start wanting to make adaptations and make culture and strategy work together, that's when you got to look at systems. So yeah, I want to know everything about their culture, but I also need to take a deeper step in there and understand, okay, how are things working together? Back to the guiding thing. If I don't understand the terrain that I'm going to be leading people through and I don't help them understand the terrain, I'm not being a responsible guide.
Yeah, I love this. This is great. So anybody who has a business with more than one person in it, even if it's just you, but let's say at least 2 people, there is some kind of a culture happening in your world. And changing it today is probably a tall order, but you can implement strategy in order to weather this storm, keeping culture in mind. I love that. And the call center thing makes so much sense. Like I actually have a friend right now who is currently, as older in years, he's in his 50s, weathering a financial storm by being in a call center. And he's been like, wow, I really don't want to stay here. It is, a lot of just drudgery, a lot of repetition, a lot of screaming voices on the other end of phones, and understanding that, somebody out there has taken a culture and shifted that element And actually, I like the way you said it, pouring into people in order to get your brand evangelists who say, no, you've got to work there because they're going to pour into you. Like how, I mean, if anybody believes in karma, that's the business model. Like, look at that. I love it. So when we were ramping up before we went live, this is a massive pivot to the conversation, but you had said all the way back in the 2000s, pre-2010, you were on the early curve of figuring out webinars and online communication, and you're an early Zoom adopter, and so you've seen kind of all these iterations of the next tech. And do I have this right? Did you say that you were actually kind of at least, deliberately putting awareness around the notion that there were many people who would thrive as trainers in a live setting, they were falling apart online, and you wanted to figure that out?
Yeah.
Did you figure it out?
Parts. So back into, here's some transitions between lives. So I was a consultant and coach for nonprofits, camps, mission organizations, NGOs back in the early 2000s. My brother worked for a very large insurance company, high up. He was high up in the insurance company. I went to visit him, and as a consultant, he says, "Hey, you should go check out the CEO. He has an open 45 minutes. Why don't you go down and talk with him?" And of course, you get open to a C-suite, you go talk with him, and with no hope of getting any work or anything like that. But I just chatted with him, and being a hard-charging CEO, he says to me, "All right, John, I'm not going to hire you, but if I wanted to turn my staff into coaches, what would I do?" And that launched our conversation.
Wow.
And about back and forth, he gave my name to the head of the corporate university. We went back and forth, and I ended up being brought in to do their leadership development programs, and also experiential programs for them. And within the first year, it pivoted to being both organizational and professional leadership development. In that, and this was back in 2007, we started a lot of our technical training was moving to webinars. And we just, it's an award-winning training group. And so really, really talented in-person trainers. And when we started to do the webinar piece, we found out that engagement and actually effective learning behavior change dropped. And a group of us got together. I wasn't necessarily, we were kind of put together and said, figure this out. Why isn't this working? Because you get the pressure from the finance department that says, we've got to do this because we can't get everybody in the same room. That's just way too much money. And you've got pressure from field leadership that says, yeah, but it's got to work. So what we figured out, a couple of things. The in-person facilitators, those trainers that were excelled in the classroom, in the in-person context, they thrive on that live feedback. And whether they're extroverts or introverts, whatever it is, they still are able to adjust their message and their approach to what's happening in the room because they can see it all and they can see everything. When they got online, they didn't have that input, that feedback. So they kind of just pretended, and oftentimes they pretended wrong. So that was one thing, helping them understand that you're not going to have that kind of feedback, so you got to ask for it. When we would design, and I had the chance to work closely with a lot of instructional designers and actually learned a lot of those skills alongside of facilitation skills, we would design in-person programs understanding that every 10 to 15 minutes, you've got to shift and change fields, either with what they're looking at, what they're doing. Somehow it was proved accurate by Dr. What is his name? Brain Rules, Medina, John Medina, I believe his name is. And he, the Brain Rules talks about how every 10 to 15 minutes, your brain has to shift. In the virtual context, we learned that you need to ask for that kind of a shift. So totally changed the way that we would design programs, because we had to, every 3 to 5 minutes, we were asking, type something in. Hey, point to this screen. Can you share this? Go to a breakout room, do these types of things. So that, we have this picture right now when we're talking about meetings, we're looking at this much in virtual meetings. our participants have all this field all the way around them that we don't get to see, that is full of distractions. If we're not asking for engagement, we're not going to
calling
keep
them
it.
back in.
Exactly. Continuously. So that was one. The other thing that we learned is that if you want to be effective, you've got to realize everything's going to take longer online. If you're on a webinar and you try and script it or do it like you do a live in training, you're going to go over every time. In the past month or 2 months, we've realized that in this context, with so many new tools out there, we're adding 20, 30, 40% to the time, because your transitions take so much longer when you're asking them, when you're going outside or you're going to a different tool. Think about on Zoom, we can talk about this whole current transition, but most people are treating Zoom like glorified conference calls. I spoke to a college class a few weeks ago, and as soon as they started the Zoom meeting, all the students turned off their video and muted their microphone because that's what they were told to do. Man, we're wasting an opportunity. We're leaving so much on the table just by having the visual, which back in the day, we didn't have this visuals for the webinar participants. They got the video of the presenter and maybe a shared screen with a PowerPoint. Nowadays, there's so many different options. And if you think that webinars are going to stay the same after this, you're going to fall behind. You've got to change your thinking about what a webinar is. Think about in Zoom, if you just want people to use the chat function, you've got to teach them how. If you want them to use the nonverbal feedback forms, if you want to use the reaction buttons, anything you ask them to do in Zoom, realize if this is the first time you're using these tools with this group, there's going to be a learning curve. As soon as you start thinking, the amazing things can happen when you start to think of using co-apps. So at the same time that you're doing Zoom, you open up a Poll Everywhere or Mentimeter, or you open up Jamboards or Google Shared Docs. That learning curve just increases as well. It definitely transforms how powerful and experiential your meeting can be, but you've also got to account for that learning curve. So everything takes more time. The other thing is when you're in person, I would plan on every 75 to 90 minutes, you've got to have a break. You got to get them up and move. You've got to do bio breaks, all that kind of stuff. In Zoom meetings or virtual meetings, well, you even said this too, we all have Zoom fatigue.
Oh yeah, I call it Zoom exhaustion. Zoom
exhaustion. Well, it comes from the fact that we'll sit through a 2-hour Zoom meeting and not move. That exhaustion comes not from exerting yourself. It comes from not moving. It comes from staying focused and having your field be the same for that extended period of time. In-person workshops, I'm moving or changing topics and changing format every 15 minutes, but I'm taking a hard break and either having people take a break and get a snack, or I'm having them up and moving, some sort of stretching or exercise. With virtual meetings, that's down to every 25 or 30 minutes, I try and do something where they get out of their seats, something where there's movement, something where, if it's longer than that, it's go get a drink of water, go take care of your whatever you need and come back. But even in between those times, are you standing up and are you moving? And in the last couple of weeks, what I found and what people I work with have found, after that kind of a Zoom meeting where you're moving every 25 or 30 minutes, you're much less fatigued. So
wow,
if
cool.
You're thinking about that, yeah.
Yeah, I was on a Zoom call 2 weeks ago, and it was a big Zoom. There was like 40 people in the room, and there was this one head that was bobbing. It was like bobbing up and down. Like, what is going on? Treadmill. Had a treadmill under her desk, and she was the most engaged person in the entire meeting.
Yeah.
So, to explode your example of getting physical, like, holy cow.
Yeah. Well, again, I geek out on the science part of this, but your cognitive capacity diminishes tremendously if you're sedate.
Yes.
That's why they say that sitting is the new smoking. That's been going around for a while.
Yeah.
For the longest time, I've had a alarm. My watch tells me when I've been sitting for more than 60 minutes. Now it's my choice whether I listen to my watch. But I try. One of the things I try to do is every 90 minutes I move, even if it's just a little bit. It's not like I go out for a mile run. My knees don't work that way anymore. But I have.
Well, you were exploring the wilderness for how long? I mean, really?
Well, there's people say, "What's the matter with your knee?" And I say, "A lifetime of questionable decisions." So
I like that answer.
Yeah. So yeah, it's changing the way that we look at and design meetings. And so many people I work with think they know how virtual meetings work. And if all you're doing is transferring information, yeah, that's fine. But now we can't stop making decisions. We can't stop problem solving just because our meetings don't lend themselves to it. We need to figure out, how do we do virtual decision making, virtual design, all these types of things, which require a different sort of interaction than just sharing information and talking heads. And that's my challenge, is helping people, number one, catch that vision, and then figuring out how to do it as simply as possible. You hit it on the head. You keep it simple, but you make it as simple as possible and no simpler.
Right.
You gotta measure the level of complexity and figure out what you really want to accomplish and what's the trade-off.
So you have this amazing competency in this. Is this something like, if somebody's watching this and going, wow, I've been in a lot of really bad meetings for my business and we need this. I mean, I understand that, strategy, I mean, that's something that you would totally consult on. Is this part of strategy? Could somebody say, John, help us? Can you guide our Zooms? Because let's say we keep hearing the new normal, right? And I don't know what that necessarily means, but I do know very confidently that remote work has been proven to have higher function than a lot of people gave it credence prior. Zoom is a thing. It's not a new thing, but it is much more largely adopted and will become part of culture longer term because of this. So this is in some way part of our new normal. And there's a lot of people who aren't going to have it right. So, I mean, can you help some people have it right? Is that something we can ask, Into Wisdom group for help?
Well, first of all, thank you for assuming that talking about something equals competency. I like to hope that I'm competent at it. But again, all people are seeing now is me talking about it.
Right.
Now, the reality is there's a couple of different things. One is there's just a technical skill level that you need to learn how to run your platform, whether you're using Zoom, GoToMeeting, WebEx, Microsoft Meetings, Google, whatever it is. Learn what you can accomplish with the platform you're on. Long time ago, this is back in, I think it was probably 2009, 2010. I wrote a book called The Webinar Manifesto. The one and only thing I remember from that, and I'm not even sure they said it this way, but this is the way I heard it. They said, read the user guide for the platform that you're using. Read it, know it inside and out, and then figure out how to break the platform. The idea is that the user guide and all the guidance that you get now on the help centers for whatever platform they're using, they're telling you how they envision you using their platform. Once you know that, then you take what you want to use it for and you break the platform, and I would say bend it to your will and your outcomes. And that's why the technical proficiency, people stepped into this. I'd been using Zoom for years and years and years, but there's a lot of people who've been using it for a few years and didn't know all that it could do.
How about?
And just discovering, so this is early conversations 2 months ago, right when all this thing hit. I had people calling me, and a lot of both professional clients and pro bono clients. A lot of the pro bono ones were just like their camps and their churches and their places that they just saw their programs slip away. We'd get on the phone and I'd ask, what's the matter? Where are you at? What are you missing right now? And as we talked, and I said, well, have you ever thought about maybe trying this, or maybe you could do this? And we started exploring, and just through those questions, we're able to transform the way that they were thinking about their next few months. And what started off as a really down and depressing conversation for them, they would leave the conversation saying, man, I'm excited about what could happen here. Because they just thought about not only how could they move things to a virtual context, but they started seeing how a virtual context could enhance what they are doing when they blend it into the future.
That's great.
So, your question is, can I help? I think I can, and a
I know
big
you
piece of
can.
it is strategic thinking and doing strategic planning. Big piece of that is exactly what we talked about. What's your destination? Don't focus on the problem. Focus what success looks like for you, and then we sit back and figure out what is it that we can. What are the tools that we have at our fingertips that we can use? I've been having conversations with a lot of nonprofits who saw their spring and summer fundraisers go out the window.
Right.
And fundraisers are easy to switch onto a virtual platform because they are already probably using them anyhow. Fundraising events, people are throwing up their hands and say, how do I do a tea party? How do I do a festival? How do I do a casino night? And where I like to start with those groups is, let's talk about, don't give up your brand. People are used to, this might be your 50th annual tea party. If you skip this year and just go to, hey, give us donations online, that's great. But you just lost that feeling of that brand in that event.
Right.
So let's talk about why you do a tea party. What are the things that you usually do at a tea party? How can we make those things virtual? How can we expand this to a larger base? And in that exploration, it's more than just taking a plug and play virtual fundraising event. It's you keeping what makes you uniquely you. And that takes just a little bit of strategic effort. The other thing that you do, if you just hand it off to another organization that's going to do the strategic planning around it, or they're just going to deliver an online virtual event, you just gave up volunteer involvement. And volunteer involvement, those are usually the same people who are giving you the largest donations.
Yeah.
So here,
or their friends, maybe.
You've just re-engaged your most important patrons.
Yeah.
And so that's a big piece of it. But for any organization, it's exploring what are you learning, what are you doing right, and what are you doing wrong in this new virtual context. Let's talk about recovery starts right now. We're in this for a long time.
Sadly, I think you're right.
Yeah. Well, even if we all go back, we're stepping into a brand new world. I've got a friend, leadership in uncharted territory. And what he did is he took the Lewis and Clark, Todd Bolsinger is his name.
Okay.
And he wrote a book called Canoeing the Mountains. And he took the Lewis and Clark expedition as a metaphor for leadership today.
Wow.
They started off in canoes because they thought they were going to be paddling the inland waterways to the Pacific Ocean. They ran out of river. And their canoeing expedition became mountaineering. What do you do when you're leading off the map? And we're off the map.
We are off the map.
And if you keep on canoeing when you run out of river, you're not going anywhere. So you got to think differently about how you're going to step forward. And a big piece of that, then this is you mentioned our first interaction when I came up to you, and I just mentioned, hey, I see this, I love it, and here's how you can be even more effective with it.
Yep.
What that was, and the reason why that was important. Number one, I sensed, even before I knew you, I sensed that you were somebody who was continuous improvement. You want to always be growing.
Oh, yeah.
And the best thing that can happen is getting outside feedback and outside input about where you're really at. When I was an internal guy in the corporate university, I thought I'm a pretty good facilitator, but I would never facilitate my own groups, my own teams, my own people I was working with. You just can't be that outside mirror being held up, that outside voice, and still facilitate the group and be a part of it.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work. So having somebody outside your organization be that sounding board and be able to say, hey, this is what I see. I don't know enough about your group, ascribe motives to it, or I can't interpret what it is. I can just say, hey, this is what I see. And when you get that outside perspective, it goes alongside. Doesn't mean that you have to take it. You don't even have to believe it, but you put it into your thinking. Now you can be even more intentional about what you want to become.
Yeah, no, I love that. And if you think about what we are walking into, I like you're abandoning the idea of the new normal, that it's a whole new world, because I think that is true. But we are, for lack of a better term, old people entering a new world. We have our old habits, our own organizations that are old, our own old constructs are there. And Gary Vaynerchuk's famous for saying that the internet is not the reason why people are acting out. That it's for the old fuddy-duddies who might say, "Oh, the internet, it's causing all those kiddos to turn into blah blah blah." Okay, no, actually, what it's doing is giving you a place to amplify what already exists within you. And so the ones who are spreading more good on the internet probably were already dwelling on that. And the ones who were already dwelling on the bad went ahead and dwelled on it very, very bigly, to coin a Trumpism, bigly on the internet. So we kind of know, if we believe Gary, and I do, it's coming from an existing condition. We have existing conditions that are moving into this great unknown, and getting an outsider's state of culture, understanding that there's going to have to be likely responses to the new demands of the world that we live in, is probably super critical. It's that outside voice you cannot generate yourself. You just can't.
Yeah, and you know that, I mean, for everybody out there, that your grandparents said the same thing about radio.
Yes.
And then depending on your current age, but then in the 50s, they said the same thing about television. And then guess what? Mr. Rogers came up and said, this is an amazing tool that can be used for good.
Yes.
And the same thing goes for any new technology. It's an amoral tool. The only morals it has are the ones that you bring to it. And it continues to go back to, part of it is the growth mindset. That's the current phrasing about seeing potential rather than seeing limits.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been around forever. Before Angela Duckworth and Dweck, people were talking about this perspective that if, Eleanor Roosevelt said, if you fight for your limitations long enough, sure enough, they're yours. And that's basic growth mindset stuff back in the 30s and 40s.
Sure. Well, and Napoleon Hill wrote in the 20s and 30s. I mean, so Think and Grow Rich, same stuff. It's I think we understand it a little bit more culturally. It's a little bit more pervasive now, but it doesn't mean any of us apply it without actually being intentional with applying it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so one of the things that I work with is I've created a whole bunch of leadership professional development curriculum, and some of it is original, most of it is borrowed. I claim, figure out how to make it work better.
Yep.
One of the things, I was at this large corporate university. Every single one of the VPs in the C-suite came to me separately and said, we really need to work on critical thinking. And being a designer and all that kind of stuff, I asked, well, what do you mean by critical thinking? Success statement? What would it look like if we were being critical thinkers? All of them had a different definition. And when I started doing the research, I realized that that's something that's true out there when we're talking about teaching critical thinking. There's not an agreement, if you can teach it at all, let alone how to teach it and what it is. There's lots of different ways of approaching it. Well, when you get number one, you get a mandate from all the executives, you better take it seriously. And the second piece, if they give you input, you better include it in your solution.
Yeah.
So I had to take a step back and say, I can't call this critical thinking because all of them have a different picture of what it is. So I created a really simple model that I've actually taught to everybody from upper elementary school kids up to C-suite executives. That's called quality thinking. And it's for, when I teach it to the kids, it's focus, think, act, reflect.
Okay.
It's that simple. It gets more complex when you get into start teaching it to high level problem solving, root cause analysis, all that. But ultimately those four things, focus, think, act, reflect. most organization individuals miss out on the first and the last one. When you say focus, it's actually asking a question: do I really need to focus on this? How often have you been in organizations where they create charter groups to solve a problem that they already have policy for? Or they skip over really diving in and focusing on an issue because they think they already have it solved. That's the first step, is asking yourself, do I need to focus on this? Are there high value impact? Does this involve a lot of dollars? Does this involve something that we are really passionate and have strong opinions about? You should focus on that. That's how you fight confirmation bias. I don't know if you've heard of any of that going around these days.
Only a little bit.
Asking yourself, number one, do I need to focus on this? And then you go into thinking, critical, collaborative, creative thinking, all kinds of the processes there. Acting is that when you've thought through that action plan, that what you're going to do, you actually have to implement it. You act on it, and that involves communication, gathering resources. It involves the making sure you have the right people involved, all that. So you act. The thing that organizations and individuals also neglect is reflect. Because it doesn't look like you're doing anything, but actually that's where the learning and continuous growth and development happen, is after you're done, or after phases of your project, stop, ask yourself, first of all, take a breath.
Yeah.
What worked? What didn't? What did I do well? How can I improve? How is our group structured? Do we need to get anybody else involved? How are we going to do it different next time? Guess what? That goes back into your focus. So it creates this cycle of quality thinking. If there's two things, if I work with an organization and I only had, and it's a tough, if you asked only one, it'd be a tough fight, but I'd say teaching people how to coach and how to be coached would be the number one thing that I would give any organization or individual who wants to be a great professional. Coaching skills. Really closely up there is quality thinking skills. These are the things that make great professionals. They make, even, it's not just reserved for executives or even leaders. If you want to be a really excellent professional, individual contributor, leader, executive, those two things are the two most important things, I think.
I couldn't agree more. It's amazing how few people choose to focus on those elements, especially, I mean, the quality thinking. I like that terminology, quality thinking, because actually I've always struggled with critical thinking. Not always, only in the last handful of years. Because critical already sets you up linguistically to think about like negative, like looking at all of the roadblocks and focusing on the roadblocks, or, you know, whatever it is, I find the negative and maybe I find the only one positive to get me out of the negative. There's like this linguistic setup that's just icky. And, you know, I've got a background in hermeneutics, you know, talk about having weird backstories. So looking at the linguistic trails that you can go down and go, ooh, that's a loaded term. And, you know, it's obviously loaded. I mean, if you're being critical of somebody, you are negative on whatever that aspect is. So the thinking that you would like me to do right now is critical. I get that it can be also the term important. It's crucial, but I'd rather have it be crucial thinking than I would critical. And so your version is like way better. We go with yours.
Yeah. Well, and also it's to me, that was one of the things that exploded, is because we think about, there's one way of looking at critical as negative. The other is looking at it as convergent thinking, meaning that if you have enough options, you need to get it down to the best 2 or 3 before you can really act. Right. Otherwise, you get a distribution of force or an energy. The picture, I don't know if you remember high school physics class, they used to put a big, and the teacher would take a sledgehammer and break it. The reason why it doesn't crush the person's chest is because that is all, the force is distributed across the whole block and it doesn't reach the person.
Right.
When we try and do too much too quickly, and we don't do critical thinking around what it is that'll have the best and most impact, you end up wasting your energy, distributing your energy over too many things. Right. Now you go to, I remember seeing a Mythbusters episode. My son, 6-year-old son, is just a huge Mythbusters fan, which I don't mind at all.
Yeah.
And they talk about breaking a window. If you've ever been to fundraisers where they give you a big sledgehammer and say, bust up a car, do a lot of damage on the side panels, but when you try and break a window, more often than not, the sledgehammer bounces right off. Distribution of force. But if you want to break a car window, they have these little spring pin
Tiny little point. Yep.
tiny little point, and a little like ballpoint pin spring that will bust that window because all the force is focused on one little point. So you can have great creative thinking and divergent thinking and what all the different terms that you do. That's huge and important. And I find people who are skilled at divergent thinking oftentimes are challenged about how do you bring it down to that fine point that's going to impact the world because you have it such a fine point. Yeah. So again, going back to strategy and culture, convergent, divergent, creative versus critical thinking, you can't have one without the other if you want to impact the world.
I love that. I love that. Can we leave it right there for people? I like that. Yeah. So, I mean, you can't have one without the other if you want to impact the world. Yeah. Like, so actually, I've been thinking about this the whole time, John. There's been probably 5 to 10 moments during this where I'm like, ooh, if I could have written that down, that would have been a tweetable today. Like,
hey, we should have recorded this.
Gosh darn it. Well, I'm glad we're streaming to 4 locations right now and recording to my hard drive because we can. Yes. But yeah, I'm totally transcribing this and finding the tweetables. Like they're this full of nuggets. So if you are coming in at the last part of this internet, hello everybody. 1, thank you. And why weren't you here when we started? Well, I already know why, because we didn't really announce it. Go back and watch. If you are in business, I mean, any size business. I don't care what level in the business you are. We are entering the new world, not the new normal. And there's a whole bunch of actionable information in here and also mind clarifying information about how we're going to enter into the new normal or the new world as it is. You need to meet my friend John. So John is able to guide businesses through the times as they are, if they're interested in being guided through the times. And he'll probably take you on a wilderness exploration through the woods. You'll have to figure that out by rewatching this. You know, you're just going to have like a little cup of water, some duct tape, and like a spoon. And then you're going to go into the woods and figure it all out.
Hey, can I say something really quick? Because I'm hoping that some of my people watch this. And you guys that are watching this, if you fear video, if you fear getting involved in going Facebook Live or YouTube Live or any of that kind of stuff, Josh, what I love about Josh is he is a professional in that world, but he says, guess what? You don't need to be. All you need is a phone, and you can be involved in that. And I love he lowers the threshold of entry into such an important piece of our world right now. So check out Josh's information about how to do the video pieces. And he's just such an encouraging guy. So I appreciate you so much for this opportunity to talk and share. It's a fun conversation. So thank you.
Well, and anytime I get to hang out with you is a good day. So, you know, win-win. Even if nobody was watching and I checked, people were watching. So that's good. But any way you cut it, I enjoy my time with you, John. So this is awesome. Thank you. And everybody watching, thank you. I don't know when my next one is because I don't even keep my own calendar anymore. So at some point, I'm going to get a little ding and it says you need to go live with somebody. I'm going to be like, oh, I like them. And I'm going to go live. So until next time, thank you. Go be well. Stop licking doorknobs, okay? I mean, that's a bad idea in the world that we live in right now. And you know what? Go find John and be friends with him digitally. He's one of those good dudes. By the way, are you still doing office hours?
I don't have set office hours. I try and announce them every week.
Okay.
But here's the other thing. If you just check I keep my Zoom room open if I'm not doing deep work or in another media. It's just like an office. If you walk by and you just stick your head in, I might be in there at my desk.
So, and I love that. I've stopped by one of John's office hours and I happened to catch him just me. And so we hung out for a while. But the idea that John is one of those available professionals, he actually lives it like through and through. So if you want to actually hang around the great John Losey, and I'm the one who said great, he never says that. You actually get to take the opportunity because he's that intentional about being present for people. really, I mean, this is one of those rare birds that you deserve to know. So go know John Losi, and then we're going to sign off, and he and I are going to talk for another couple of minutes without you. Yes, I'm hoarding him for 5 more minutes. See ya. Oh, look at that. That's awesome. Yeah. Now, is that that's your, before we go,
Yeah.
you were doing that, you were doing lives with that brand, right?
It's one of my YouTube channels, and this
Yeah.
is it's called Living Life Juicy, and it's about being present and kind as you go about doing great things. And sometimes it's the nice, like, sweet stuff, but Living Juicy, think about taking a bite out of an orange.
Yeah.
It's nice and sweet, but it also gets all over the place. So the flip side of that is
Abundant.
live abundant and a little bit messy.
Oh, yeah. All right. See, I knew I was speaking truth about you, sir. All right. God bless everybody watching. We'll see you on the flip side.